If you enjoy our podcast, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all of our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. See the show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading news.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Reider's Block. I am your host, Journal staff writer Sean Reider, as always. Been a minute since we've done a pod. Not a ton that happens in kind of February, so we kind of took that month off. Really, after National Signing Day earlier in the month, there just isn't a lot of football news for us to really do a pod, but plenty coming up. Spring practice starts on Tuesday, March 11th, which at the time of recording is this next Tuesday for us. That'll run over the next 6 weeks for New Mexico with 2 scrimmages, I think both on Saturdays. And a spring game, unpopular as they may be. Right now, I think Texas, USC, and Nebraska are the 3 that have kind of canceled or moved to cancel their spring games this season. But UNM's going to do one. First one under head coach Jason Eck on Friday, April 18th. I don't know the format for that yet. They're not playing with a totally full roster right now. They're somewhere in the 80s. They're not close to the 105 that you're kind of allotted at this point. So we'll see how healthy they are and if they'll do a full game. But they do intend to do kind of a spring showcase of sorts. With that call, all that kind of in mind, spring ball coming up, I did want to kind of just go position by position and kind of give my few thoughts on what we're going to kind of be expecting to see and what we're kind of thinking heading into spring ball. I don't know if I'll be able to hit every single player on the roster. I know the roster is not public yet. I do have a copy of the roster. And there's some names I wanted to kind of get out there and share at this point that I'm kind of looking at. And this to me is, in an era where the transfer portal and NIL and all that stuff has always made it where, you come into spring practice and you see so many new faces and you see so many new bodies and all that, and you have to learn all of them. This has become one of my favorite times of the year. I do really enjoy getting a good look at some of these new guys coming in through the mid-year window, the fall transfer window as well. And then you have, the fall window where you always have, prep kids coming in from the summer and all that too. But to me, this is kind of a fascinating time of year. It's really interesting to get a grip on what this team may look like. And there's a lot of transfers that UNM will be kind of turning to, and that we'll be writing a lot about over the next couple weeks. As always, kind of want to start maybe the most important position in a lot of ways with the quarterbacks. And I've written a little bit about it at this point, and I've talked about it, I think, on the pod previously. I am expecting Idaho transfer Jack Lane to kind of start and end spring practice as UNM's QB1. 6'2", 190-pound Idaho transfer. He led the team with 1,477 yards and 14 touchdowns to 4 interceptions last season. That's all while missing over half the season after he suffered a collarbone injury, I believe, in the opener against Oregon. I think that was a 24-14 loss. Idaho really played him quite well. And then just the final 5 minutes of the fourth quarter, that's kind of where things got awry. But I'm expecting him to be that guy. When you talk to, head coach Jason Eck, offensive coordinator Luke Schleissner, it's pretty clear there's a lot of trust in his abilities and all that. Last year was kind of his, I don't want to say big year. I mean, he was dealing with the injuries and all that too, but he was a starter entering the season. And guys talk highly about him. I talked with offensive coordinator Luke Schleissner. He said he's like a coach on the field. He wants to go into coaching. Both his parents are doctors. He had to, he was a pre-med student. He had to go talk to his parents and say, hey, I don't think I'm going to be doing pre-med anymore, which is probably a bit of a tough conversation. But yeah, and from what you kind of hear from Schleissner and that group, it's that he's one of the guys right now that, he played at Idaho. He knows expectations and all that too, and he's kind of becoming a bit of a leader in terms of, hey, like this is the standard that we have, and we got to all get to it. In terms of him as a player, not much of a runner. I know that might be a little bit disappointing after everybody saw Devin Dampier's year last year, where he's one of the most thrilling runners in the country. But he can pick up some first of his legs. Seems when you watch the tape, I mean, very comfortable in a lot of like the play action, RPO stuff that they do. Seems like a good decision maker, and that's probably the most important, aspect to making it to a playing quarterback. So yeah, I am expecting him to be that guy. I think we'll touch on the other quarterbacks in a second here. I did get this question in a mailbag. Can the other quarterbacks, make a run and kind of threaten them? Can they? Sure. Will they? I'm not so sure. I don't think that's totally in the cards quite yet, unless there's something I'm completely missing, and that's always possible. Or there is a kind of, something really unforeseen, like a kind of a freak injury or something like that, but you can never plan for that. In terms of the rest of the depth chart with the quarterbacks, I have absolutely no idea who will be the number 2 at this point. That's kind of been the norm since I've been on the beat. My first year, Dylan Hopkins came in, and he was basically the unquestioned starter, even if they always didn't want to say that. But, there was some kind of mumbling, too, about, we don't know, who's going to be the backup behind Hopkins. It could be Devin Dampier, who was, at that time a freshman. It could be DC Tabscott, who transferred in from, App State. And that was kind of pitched like it's a little bit of a battle. It ended up being Dampier. Last year, Bronco Mendenhall came out in first week of spring practice, and he said, hey, Devin Dampier is our quarterback, but it was a question who's going to be the backup, and that really did not get resolved until kind of midway through fall camp, if I remember correctly, where they went to Isaiah Chavez over the likes of James Lobstein and Emery Floyd. But yeah, we'll touch on those guys a bit. UNM does have Isaiah Chavez coming back. This will be his 6th year of college football. I think it will be his last. I don't know his entire eligibility situation, but he's been at UNM the entire time, so I assume this will probably be his last season. But he is one of the longest tenured players on the roster. Pretty known quantity at this point. Emery Floyd, who I don't know how much people know about him at this point because really didn't play last year. Did a lot of scout team stuff, but more of a dual threat guy coming out of College of Canyons, really athletic. And then James Lobstein, more of a pocket passer type from Sussex County Community College, also played in New Haven before that. Of course, like I said it earlier, neither of them had the time on the field last season because Devin Dampier just ate all those snaps, and for good reason. Dampier was phenomenal. There is a new quarterback, though, another transfer, Gabriel Mochenbacher. I hope I am saying that correctly. I do not have the pronunciations guy yet. He's from LA Southwest College. He led the Southern California Football Association, a good JUCO conference in completion percentage. I think that was 71.2%. And passing yards with 2,824 yards with 20 touchdowns and also a league-high 13 touchdowns to boot. I encourage people to, spring practices will be open this year, so you'll be able to see him. I do encourage some people to kind of pull up some of his LA Southwest tape, and not just the highlights and all that too, but he showed he could sling it. That's a guy I'm pretty interested in. I know this staff, kind of feels good about what they got there. Definitely a bit raw, not much of a runner either, but seems like he's got the skill set and he's got some stuff that you can work with to start. So interested to see how that plays out. But I think quarterback is a little bit straightforward at this point. The main takeaway to me is that UNM has a front runner, and that's really good. That's something that they haven't had in the past. And it's a guy that showed that he can perform at a pretty high level, and be reliable. And what happens after that is anybody's guess on the depth chart at the very least. I am excited to get eyes on Mochenbacher, and I am excited to see how guys like Chavez and Floyd and Lobstein all kind of take to this new offense and what roles they maybe come out with. And maybe I am kind of excited to see, I don't know about excited, I'm curious to see if they do feel that maybe they do need to add another quarterback in kind of the spring portal window. But we'll see. I'll go from quarterback, a pretty straightforward position, to running backs, maybe the most straightforward position at this point, at the very least. I think I've yapped about it on other podcasts, but I'm excited to see some of these guys up close. I think if you're invested in the team, you probably should be excited about seeing some of these RBs up close too. You got Scott Trey Humphrey coming in from Montana State, committed to UNM over the likes of North Carolina, Virginia Tech, West Virginia. I think Boise State was in the mix as well. I feel like we've rightfully kind of talked about him a lot, but that's a big get, and that's a guy that he was FCS All-American. Obviously, UNM fans did get a chance to see him up close. I think he ran for like a $140 in the opener last season. Obviously, Montana State won 35-31. Just a lot to like there. Really athletic. He's pretty fast. It seems like he makes good decisions too. And he powered a big chunk of that that Montana State ground game. That was one of the best in the FCS last season. It was really good against New Mexico, and it took them all the way to the national championship game before they lost to North Dakota State. Damone Bankston coming in from Weber State, another 1,000-yard rusher. I don't remember off the top of my head. I think he was either first or second team. I think he was second team. All Big Sky. And that's one of that's the conference that Eck and all the Idaho guys are coming from. It's one of the better, if not one of the best FCS conferences. A lot to like with what he brings to the table. Deshaun Buchanan coming in from Idaho. Buchanan led the team in rushing last season. Not like jaw-dropping numbers. I think 530, 560. Those are the numbers that are coming to my mind. But, some stuff to like there on tape as well. And then DJ McKinney, who was the Conference USA Freshman of the Year at Sam Houston State. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head either. I should probably stop rambling about numbers I don't remember. But that's all that is to say that there's a good amount of talent to work with. This is an offense that wants to run the football. They're going to run it by way of either mid-zone, kind of, the zone concept that they lean on, or they're going to line up and they're going to run power. They're going to run some gap scheme too, and I think they have a lot of options to work with. Offensive coordinator Luke Schleissner, who I've talked about a little bit, he told me that he thought he signed the three best running backs in their league, which was the Big Sky and Humphrey, Bankston, and Buchanan. I do also want to note that Soljay Maeva-Peters is also back. He is on the roster. His season kind of peaked last year with a good game against Air Force. I think that was his first career touchdown in that game. But he didn't pick up a ton of traction down the stretch, and frankly, I kind of understand that. I mean, he was playing behind Eli Sanders, who was really brilliant down the stretch in a lot of respects. I mean, great in that Wyoming loss, really good in that San Diego State game, at least in the very beginning. And then Nakari Rogers, he got healthy as well. He was more the power back last year. And Rogers was, pretty darn good down the stretch. So it's kind of tough to crack that rotation in some ways. I think Soljay had that one fumble against Colorado State that I don't know if that totally kept him off the field, but I think that was him that had that. So I'm curious to see how he factors into this running back room. I'm still interested in his skill set. I think he can do a lot of different things. You like the background of him playing quarterback in the past when he was at BYU and all that. Between all of those guys, I am really curious to see how these touches are managed. When Brian Vincent was the offensive coordinator here 2 years ago, he came out and he said, we really want a bell cow. We want a guy that we can just, feed the rock and just ride and just go with through games and all that. And he got one. They brought in Ja'Cory Grosky-Merritt, and he was absolutely sensational that year. Last year, with Jason Beck as the offensive coordinator, he said, well, no, we want to make sure we're maximizing all the different skill sets. And the challenge, it's on us to, make sure we're finding ways to get all these guys touches. And obviously, as injuries piled up, that Utah State game was really the game last year. That I think that took out Javen Jacobs for sure. And then I believe Nakari Rogers had an injury that game too. Then Sanders kind of took the reins back, I should say. And Devin Dampier was electric. It was a really good pairing, and that kind of caught fire. And then Rogers got healthy and all that too. I don't know. That was a little bit of a tangent there. I don't know how this staff will 100% approach it. I do think the fact that they've added all these different guys, they're not going to just say, all right, Humphrey's our guy. They're going to figure out ways to get all them touches. I don't know if it'll quite be to the kind of buckets approach that they had last year, where the staff last year looked at Sanders and they're like, this is speed back. That's kind of our guy with that skill set. Nakari Rogers, as I mentioned before, a little bit more of that power skill set too, and you saw that during the Mexico State game. And then Javen Jacobs, who they thought was the best pass catcher coming out of the backfield too. I don't know if it's that cut and dry at this point too, and I don't know if they'll do that buckets approach, but I do think there's different skill sets here for sure. And I think they're going to figure out a way to probably, kind of spread the ball around. But there is always that tendency where, if you do have a guy that is just kind of head and shoulders above the others, then you're going to figure out ways to get him the ball first and foremost and kind of work from there. I can't say I'll be at spring practice tracking every single solitary carry, but I am really excited to learn, a little bit more about these skill sets kind of coming up and you see what these guys do really well. As I touched on earlier, I think that's one of the fun parts of spring practice. You do kind of get that, I don't want to say behind the scenes, but that relatively intimate look at, all right, this is what these players are. What I will be tracking on a near daily basis, the offensive line. And that's been the case every year since I've been here. My first season coming in, it was 2023. And that was really kind of a pivotal year in some ways, in the sense that, the offensive line had to get better. It did get better. And then the offensive line last year, it was a little bit of a mystery. It was all, a lot of transfers coming in, not a lot of returning guys. You didn't really know what things were going to end up looking like, and ended up being a really good offensive line. It's going to be the case this year. There's a good deal of transfers coming in. UNM almost lost their entire starting offensive line for the second straight year. And on that kind of note, I think one of the big moves that UNM made this year was, getting Richard Pierce back out of the portal. You get Pierce back, and like I said, with that one guy coming back, that one guy, you're not replacing your entire starting offensive line for the second year in a row, so you do get some semblance of continuity, although I don't know how much continuity matters when there's just kind of one guy. But I think maybe the most important aspect is that, Pierce is a guy that was productive last year, started every single game at right guard, and he was also a team captain. He was a guy that was well-respected on the team, well-respected in the room. Obviously, he had that turkey drive towards the end of the year for Thanksgiving and all that. That's a guy that, I think for right now, without seeing any of these guys in pads yet, and knowing 100% how this staff totally is looking at this kind of offensive line room, I think that's the guy I'll pencil in kind of as the day one right guard, and we'll see what happens from there. I am curious to see if Isaiah Solomon, who was UNM's Rhino last year, he was kind of the hybrid tight end, 6 offensive lineman, really more of just an extra blocker in a lot of situations, but was quite good in that role. I'm curious to see if he kind of returns to the right guard rotation. He's played most of his career there, but there's a good deal of and we'll touch on it some more in a little bit, but a good deal of interesting interior offensive lineman candidates that could probably move around a bit. I'm very interested to see what happens at center. Idaho transfer Caden Robnett, he started last season for the Vandals at center against Oregon, and then I think he played right guard the game after, and I forget who they played immediately after that. But he's a guy that he suffered an injury, so he only played 2 games last season. But he's a guy that I'm curious if they're going to go back to him at center. Showed he could play pretty well against Oregon. I thought he did a lot of nice things when you go back and you look at that game. Obviously, that kind of final 5 minutes where Oregon kind of said, we're just going to let Derek Harmon go up against Robnett and kind of do the club rip. Didn't go so well for Robnett. I don't know how many guys it would go well for because Harmon is a top 50 NFL draft prospect. But yeah, I am curious to see if this staff is kind of thinking, all right, we're gonna take Robnett back to center, or if they are gonna kind of maybe move him around a little bit more with the symptom of not the symptom, if only for the fact that they have some more trust and have seen him more up close. Malik Elaine, though, another guy that UNM got out of the portal. He got some spot starts at center last season against New Mexico State and Hawaii, and did pretty well in those games. New Mexico State in particular. He's a guy that I think definitely could and should probably be in the mix for center as well. And then Juwan Singletary, who was UNM starting center entering last season, and then he suffered a season-ending injury that I still don't know what the injury was. That led to Mackenzie Agnello kind of getting thrown into the fire at center, against Montana State last season, and he had one of the more impressive seasons I've seen. Just kind of picking things up there from center and just kind of moving along after that. Singletary is back, courtesy of the kind of Diego Pavia ruling that allows an extra year of eligibility to former JUCO and NAIA transfers. I'm curious how Singletary factors in. We saw a good deal of them in spring practice and fall camp last year, but I haven't seen any game reps, obviously, with the season-ending injury kind of happening before. So I don't know. With those 3 guys in mind, I'm really curious to see, if it will be a straight-up competition for the starting center role. I'm curious, what coaches, these guys in particular, I'd like to, I'm looking to talk to offensive line coach Cody Booth and kind of get a feel for, what they like in centers and all that too. I'll definitely talk to Eck about it as well. He is an offensive line guy. And I'm curious too if there's a name that we just don't know at this point. Agnello, like I just said, he was a guy that was more of a tackle, and then they not even more of a tackle. He was a tackle, and they shifted him over to center, and he played phenomenal for big chunks last season. So curious to see what happens there, but those are kind of the names I'm interested in seeing, at least in terms of center. Left guard, kind of. I don't know if it's as big of a question at this point as center or anything like that, and question might not even be the right word. But one guy I am looking about, and I wrote about him this week, I believe it's Israel Mukwiza. I don't have the pronunciation guide at this point. I hope that's how it's pronounced. But he was all Southern Conference last season on a pretty good Mercer team. Did nice things there, and pulled up the Alabama tape, 52-7 loss to Alabama. But I thought he did some really nice things, at least in terms of pass pro and in the run game too. It didn't feel like he was getting overpowered in the way that you probably would expect an FCS offensive lineman to playing against guys like Jihad Campbell and stuff like that on a pretty rock solid Alabama defense. I do think. I don't think it's just going to be just Israel kind of being the guy at left guard, but there's a lot of interior offensive linemen, and I'm curious to see how all these guys kind of align. So he's kind of my candidate at left guard, but I wouldn't put that one in stone by any stretch of the imagination. I am inclined to think Tevin Shaw is going to get some looks at left tackle. Again, wrote about that a little bit this week. He played left tackle. I believe he got his first start against Auburn last year, and then he had a season-ending injury of his own. But he held up well against Auburn, and he looked good in kind of the relatively limited action he did have last year on the field. I think Elvin Harris will probably get a look at left tackle as well too. He just has that left tackle frame. He has that experience playing the position. For those that don't remember, he is a Campbell transfer. Famika and I, the old offensive line coach, he was the O-line coach there. He kind of came in with with him when they came to UNM. So I think Harris will probably be a guy that gets some looks there. But R.J. Adams is a guy that they brought in from North Carolina A&T State. Excuse me. He played some right tackle there, so I'm curious to see. I'm curious to see and interested to see if he does end up being the guy that they're really looking at right tackle. Beyond that, frankly, I don't know if I have a great feel for the tackle depth at this point. And I do think it's really easy to kind of, look at a roster and say, well, this guy's, 6'6", 320. He's definitely a tackle. He probably is. But there's always ways you can kind of work with. And there's some guys that, frankly, until you get out and really see them play where, you might not get the entire feel that's like, this guy can be a tackle, even though he has, a little bit more of a guard frame at this point. And that might be, frankly, the gist of the whole room, frankly. I think there's some good front runners, and I think there's definitely some talent in there and relatively proven talent to a certain degree. But again, we don't know a whole lot right now, and we will find out a whole heck of a lot more in spring ball. I don't think it's kind of the relatively overwhelming unknown that the offensive line kind of had last year, where frankly, in the back of my head, I don't know if I ever wrote this or said it on a pod. I did kind of have the feel where it was like, well, it looks good, but it's a lot of different guys coming from a lot of different places, and I don't know how it's going to happen the first game of the season. And even guys like Jason Beck and Famika and I, those guys kind of said the exact same thing. Like, you just don't know how it's going to be until they hit the field, and ended up working well. But we'll see what happens with this group. On the note of questions, offensive line is always kind of the big question, and rightfully so. Everything starts in the trenches. Wide receiver is kind of the position group that, I don't know if it has the most questions. It probably has the single biggest question at this point. And I think that question is pretty simply, who else beyond Keegan Johnson is going to be a productive receiver for this team? UNM did bring in Johnson. He was a Kansas State transfer. Kind of a weird deal where he transferred in to UNM, and then Caleb Medford was one of the last receivers to kind of commit out of the portal from UNM, and he went to Kansas State, so he got a little bit of a trade there. But Johnson, played at Kansas State, previously played at Iowa 2. Johnson finished second on the team last year with 29 receptions and 359 yards, 6 foot, 206 pounds. Good frame there and all that. I know the coaching staff is excited about him. I know that they're looking to him looking at him to probably be to be the front runner in that room. Beyond that, I don't know. Right now, to kind of rehash, like UNM did lose Luke Weissong, who was excellent last season, has been, was a really, productive and reliable guy in his time in New Mexico. He's at Arizona now. Ryan Davis, who came in under offensive coordinator Brian Vincent 2 years ago from UAB, he was a guy that, frankly, I always kind of had, questions about, how much of a contributor Davis would end up being and if he could stay healthy. And I thought Davis was really good last year. I think he led all receivers in snaps played. Caleb Medford, who I just mentioned, he was a TCU transfer that came in too. None of those guys are back. They're all obviously in new locations. Weissong at Arizona and Davis at Utah, Medford at Kansas State. And the guys that are kind of left that you're kind of looking to I don't want to say wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 at this point, but to just kind of be contributors. Sean Miller, who transferred in from Illinois last year, had just one catch last season. He was, I don't want to say the odd man out in the receiver rotation because I don't know if there ever really is a true odd man out. It's just, you play with what you got. And he wasn't a guy that totally got in. I know that the coaching staff liked last year, that they liked, that he embraced kind of the more menial parts of the position, downfield blocking on the perimeter and all that. But, of course, was overshadowed with the seasons that guys like Weissong and Davis had. Michael Buckley, he's a guy that, had one, frankly, really remarkable game against Colorado State when Luke Weissong did get injured. He comes back as a guy that's, been in the program for a good while, albeit only with 8 career catches, and I think 7 of those were in the Colorado State game. And that's it, more or less. Nobody else in the room has a career catch at the FBS level. There are guys like Isaiah Blair coming in. This staff got him from Cerritos Junior College in California. 35 catches for 675 yards and 6 touchdowns last season. His tape's raw, but I definitely think there is a path to him being a productive receiver at this point, even if he doesn't have the FBS catch and all that. And I know this staff feels good about him to this point. Kader Diop is a guy that came in from San Diego Mesa College last year under the old staff. I liked his tape out of Mesa. And it just never really got to a point where he was, really going to develop quick enough to see the field. So I'm curious to see, how this staff is kind of looking at him in terms of other returning guys. Evan Weissong, obviously Luke's brother, very good athlete. I'm curious to see what happens with him. Elijah Brody, a superb athlete out of West Mesa High School. He ended up playing DB down the stretch last year when the secondary was banged up. Those are guys I'm curious to see this spring and see, what steps they might have taken forward, how this staff is going to use them. Because sometimes, frankly, under Brian Vincent, Michael Buckley was the guy that was there, but didn't really, get a lot of usage, even kind of in practice to a certain degree. And then Bronco Mendenhall's staff comes in, and then all of a sudden Buckley is a guy that's, really kind of seeing the field more, and you're kind of like, okay, we're seeing this, and obviously it leads to a point where he has that kind of great, game against Colorado State, albeit in a loss. So, maybe with some of those guys at this point, it is a little bit of a different staff getting, different eyes on guys who are developing and are taking those steps and all that. But it feels like the whole room is kind of in a prove-it spot beyond Johnson. And even then, Johnson is a guy that, frankly, there are always guys that come in from the portal and probably seem like surefire bets, and maybe don't always kind of have the intended effect that coaches might talk about and all that too. I'm not saying Johnson is going to be that guy. I think Johnson probably will be a productive receiver at this point. But yeah, there is always kind of a level of trepidation and how that happens. So I don't know. It feels like receiver has never really been a question in my time on the beat, and this year it really feels like they are kind of in a more of a prove-it spot. There are high school guys coming in this fall, though. Zaleel Smith is kind of the big name out of that group from Tualatin, Oregon. I hope I'm pronouncing that town name right. He's 3-star, pretty fast. There's some good stuff on his tape. So, this isn't the end-all, be-all, and they definitely could add another receiver or 2 or 3 if they really wanted in the portal this year. But in the spring portal window. But as of right now, at least on paper, I'm not saying this room is doomed or anything like that. I think it's probably too early for me to come out and really have strong opinions about this receiver room. But yeah, I think it is fair to say, at least on paper, it's a little bit underwhelming. But that's the beauty of kind of spring practice and fall camp, and then the season itself. You get to go out and prove it. Kind of shifting gears to tight ends. I won't spend a ton of time on the tight ends as our kind of last offensive position. But you are going to see a healthy amount of 12 personnel this year. These guys are going to be important. I don't know. I don't know if you're going to have one really dynamic, pass catching tight end every single year and all that too. Because I haven't seen a lot of these guys up close. I don't know how this staff is viewing them. Obviously, we'll get answers on that down the stretch. But this is also this is an offensive staff that does like to say like, hey, like, we have things that we really like doing, but we do, and we will kind of lean on, but we will fit it to our personnel and all that. Obviously, I think kind of the big feather in the cap to a certain degree for, or the most well-known feather in the cap to a certain degree for this offensive staff is that, Jason Eck was the, offensive line coach and then offensive coordinator at South Dakota State with Luke Schleissner, who was then the tight ends coach there. And, Schleissner came in and he had, this big 6'5" tight end, kind of a walk-on. Nobody really knew what to do with him. Other coaches were talking to him and they're like, yeah, I don't know if this guy's going to make it. And that guy's name was Dallas Goedert, who, came and, became an FCS All-American under Schleissner's tutelage. And, obviously now he's a Super Bowl champion with the Philadelphia Eagles. So, this definitely is a staff that, has that pedigree of development there on the offensive side too. And, has that, that fit where, some years they will have a tight end that if he is that dynamic enough, will lead the team in receptions and will have all these touchdowns and all that too. And other years they will be, a more dynamic running back team, or they will have, like they did last year, a player like Jordan Dwyer, who was a really good receiver for them. And he's at, TCU now. So anyways, back to the tight ends. Names out of the room, kind of the new ones. Dorian Thomas, big kid out of Arizona. I think he's like 6'5", 250, which that definitely plays the position. Aiden Valdez, pretty athletic kid out of Campbell. I think he has a couple school records at Campbell to his name in terms of touchdown receptions. He's probably, and I was asked this in a mailbag, out of all the kind of small FCS guys and all that small FCS schools who I'm kind of really looking at, I think Valdez is probably outside of Mukwaza from Mercer. Valdez is probably the guy I'm really interested in seeing and seeing how that skill set kind of plays out with his frame and all that. Kean Need, a guy from Weber State, and then Cade Keith, another really big kid out of TCU. Did not really play at TCU as a freshman. I think he just redshirted. And then the one guy returning from last year's tight ends group is Vincent Santos. Santos even last year was more of a kind of the backup rhino to Isaiah Silmon down the stretch. I think there's some interesting guys in here, and it's some interesting kind of pedigrees and all that, frames and all that too. Frankly, we just kind of got to go out and see it and see how guys are kind of competing and how it's all going to play out. But yeah, I think people were kind of asking like, gosh, and I think it is kind of the jarring element of where they had so few tight ends last year, and then all of a sudden this new staff comes in and they're adding a bunch of tight ends and getting commitments from guys, and it's like, gosh, they must really like tight ends. They do definitely like tight ends. They're going to play a lot of 12 personnel this season, so it makes sense to go out and get a bunch of different guys. As for who's a front runner in the room, I frankly could not tell you at this point in full honesty, but definitely looking forward to getting eyes on all these guys and kind of going from there. Moving over to defense, I do want to kind of touch on the defensive line a little bit. I think the big name here is Keyshawn James Newby, who was really, really good at Idaho last season. Really dynamic rushing the passer. Did a lot of really nice things. He is here. This is his final year of eligibility that he's using on accord of the Pavia ruling, whatever we want to call that, where because he started his career at an NAIA school in Montana. And I know the coaching staff is pretty excited to have that guy back for one more season. It seems like a guy that, D-line, I don't know if you ever want to truly kind of, pencil a guy in without seeing a lot of these guys up close, but I feel safe saying that James Newby is going to be a guy that, is going to be, pretty looked upon to contribute early and contribute often. I think the big kind of, returner at this point is Gabe Lopez. Lopez, kind of some ups and downs last season in terms of production. He did have the concussion about mid-season, but he did come back and around, I think, Colorado State last year, and ended up playing, in my opinion, pretty darn well down the stretch. And really seemed like he was a little bit more locked in to a certain degree. I remember talking to him after the concussion, and he said, during that time when he was out, he said he just studied film a whole heck of a lot more, and that made a big difference in his game. And I think that reflected in his play last year. So him kind of coming in as a veteran in the group that's been here for a while, I'm interested to see what he can do and how the staff wants to use him. Xavier Slayton is another guy coming in from Idaho. I thought did good things last year. Darren Agu coming in from Vanderbilt. I think it was last year that he kind of dealt with injuries at Vanderbilt, but the year before, it definitely showed some nice things. I'm not quite sure, to what extent his role is going to be, if he is going to be kind of a frontline guy, and how that's all going to play out. Brian Booker, a Texas Southern transfer, I know the staff feels pretty good about him. He's just got to be a little bit more development and all that too, and you could say the same thing for everybody. It feels like we've done this dance before to a certain degree, where my first season on the beat, it's you talk to coaches, and I took them at their word at that time and that season, hey, this defensive line is, way more athletic, and, it's better than it was last year. And it kind of ended up being a disappointment in some regards. And then, last year it was, we feel really good about this defensive line. We feel like we've kind of refurbished it, and some nice things down the stretch. I think it grew into a relatively formidable unit, but in the beginning of the season, it was kind of in a tricky spot. And you are losing guys, you have lost guys like Kyler Drake, who I thought ended up, being pretty darn good players at the end of their UNM careers. So I am curious to, like every single position I'll say, I am curious to get more eyes on these guys and see what these guys are capable, what their skill sets look like exactly. But right now, those are kind of the guys I'm really interested in seeing. I will also note that, UNM wants to be multiple this season out of their defense. They're going to be multiple out of a 4-2-5 base. And, two of the key positions, we'll touch on the other one in a little bit, but one of the key positions there is the jack. That's kind of their boundary end. That is a, kind of a hybrid linebacker and, edge rusher kind of deal to a certain degree, more of an outside linebacker. It's probably what I should have just said first. I am curious to see, who ends up kind of emerging in that role. I think Gabe Lopez is a guy that probably could end up being that guy. But I'm curious to see how the staff likes to play it to a certain degree, and who they're really looking for. When I did talk to defensive coordinator Spence Nowinski a couple weeks ago, he did say that it's far too early to have a read on that. But they're going to be multiple because of that jack position, and we'll touch on the stars in a little bit. Shifting back a little bit, another level on the defense, we'll go to linebackers. I think kind of similar to the offensive line, I think one of the really big things that, they kind of got was they're getting Demetri Johnson back. Johnson is a guy that, kind of walked off the field after beating Washington State last year and thought that was going to be his last game at University Stadium. Walked off the field against Hawaii last year and thought that was his last game. Demetri played, a million snaps last year. I mean, that staff really, really leaned on Demetri and kind of paired him up with Randolph Kapai and then Jaden Wilson, who's transferred to UTEP, depending on the game to a certain degree. But Johnson, because of the Pavia ruling, will be back, and I think that's huge. That's a guy that's played a lot of football over the last 2 years, and kind of a pretty linear ascent up in terms of playing that football. And I think that's a pretty darn good get to get him back out and sort of see what he can do in kind of this final year of football. As I mentioned, Randolph Kapai, he's going to be coming back too. I thought Kapai, developed relatively steady throughout the season last year, and there was some good stuff, that I saw out of him. Obviously, one of the bigger kind of transfer names was Jackson Eck, Jason's son, coming in as a first-team All-Big Sky guy last year. I think those three guys are kind of what I'm looking for, kind of what I'm looking at in terms of the front line of the linebackers group at this point. And I think a lot of people kind of could have probably pointed that out instead of me. But, yeah, they all bring a wealth of experience and production to the table. It seems like relative no-brainer that those guys are kind of gonna be at the front. Mihalis Santos-Reneos, who I think is, when he's been healthy, he wasn't last year. He had a leg injury that held him out for most of the season. I think that guy, I think he's a guy that if he's healthy, I think he can be a contributor. I don't know if he's quite in that front line, but I think he can. And then there's some solid young talent in that group. Nico Bowler is a guy that I'm looking at to kind of see how this staff works for him and what steps he might have taken in his development. There is another guy. We'll kind of use him to transition into safeties. Albert Nunez is a star. Excuse me, is a linebacker. He's listed as linebacker coming in from Northern Iowa, but he was listed as a defensive back at Northern Iowa. He played linebacker at Eastern Kentucky before that. I mentioned the jack position. The star is kind of the other big position in this 4-2-5 alignment that allows them to be multiple. This is a guy that the safety that kind of plays up in the box. Does have a little bit more of a linebacker safety hybrid there. Will drop back in coverage, but can rush the passer. When I look at tape of these guys, Albert Nunez is probably the one guy that I'm kind of looking at and saying, I think that guy could probably end up being the star. That's probably more of a slightly educated guess than anything else. I haven't talked to anybody on the staff, and I could be completely wrong. But from what I've seen out of him in terms of playing Northern Iowa and what he did, dropping into coverage, rushing the passer, kind of lining up in the alley and all that too, that guy in particular, I think could probably end up being the star. So that's why I'm kind of using him as a transition between the linebackers and the safeties. I think if there's one other safety transfer you need to know, it's Austin Brawley. He played under Nowinski when Nowinski was the defensive coordinator at Ohio. God, a whole lot of Midwestern states getting jumbled up today. He played safety for Nowinski there. Did some good stuff there. He's a guy that's been shouted out by Eck as a guy that is already really familiar with this defense. So I'm curious to see, how much of a frontline guy he might end up being in that room because of that experience. And then another name to kind of throw out there, a guy that came out of the portal, again, Tavian Combs. Appears that Combs is healthy now, so he should have a full spring to kind of work and reintegrate in this defense. That did not happen last year. If you remember correctly, Combs, had his season cut short in 2023. With some kind of nagging leg injuries. Basically had to sit out all of last spring practice last year, and only got healthy enough to play by early November last year, where he played, I think, 5 snaps against Wyoming, and then I think 2 weeks later, he announced he was entering the portal, but now he's back. And I think everybody kind of knows, if Combs is healthy, he's a guy that really can be productive. I think the key there is just staying healthy. And I'll wrap it up on the corners. There's 5 corners coming back from last season. The one I'm probably most interested, I think 5 or 6. The one I'm probably the most interested in seeing if he does kind of stick to a role in this defense is Drew Speech. That's a guy that coming out of Monterey Peninsula Community College in California. That's a guy that other players would just kind of rave about him in fall practice last year. They loved his kind of approach, his intensity, and what he kind of brought to the game. But you're kind of a young JUCO transfer coming in. It was kind of tough for him to crack the rotation, and because of injuries in the secondary, that guy ended up, having to play down the stretch and having to play some relatively meaningful snaps, particularly in that San Diego State game. I'm really interested to see, how much, of a role he might take on this year, if any at all. I don't know a ton about, how this staff views corners and all that and likes to work with them. And that's one thing I'm really looking to kind of get out of, spring practice at this point. But yeah, I think that's probably the one returner I'm really interested in seeing. I would say, newly crowned Mountain West 60-meter champion Cam Watts. I just haven't gotten a confirmation. I know he intends on playing football. He's playing as if to play football. I just have not gotten a confirmation that his waiver is all good. I know to play this season, he would need this next football season. He would need a waiver approved to do so. Him and Garrison Walker on the defensive line, I think, are the two guys that need those waivers to go through, and I just don't know if they've got them approved at this point. So we'll see. If Watts is back, yeah, I think definitely I'm interested in seeing what he can do. But again, we got to see what happens with the waiver process. And then probably the three transfers I'm looking at in that cornerback group: Abraham Williams from Idaho, John Johnson from Montana State, and Azaria Bear is his nickname, Levels from Stephen F. Austin. Those are guys I'm pretty darn interested to see how they end up kind of cracking out and shaking out in the cornerbacks rotation. And what guys kind of emerge potentially as a shutdown guy. Johnson, I mean, from what I've seen, did some good stuff at Montana State last year. And then I know this staff feels like I've said about half the guys, but I know this staff is pretty high on Williams, what he brings to the table. So that kind of rounds out the defense. In terms of special teams, I don't know at this point. There will be a new punter for the first time in a while if Aaron Rodriguez using up the last of his college eligibility last year. So definitely I'm not used to writing about a new punter, so that'll be pretty interesting to see. And then I think there will be a little bit of a kicking competition, but I'm curious to see if Luke Drzwicki, who's been the starting kicker for the better part of the last 3 seasons, really gets a handle back on that role again, and interested to just check in with him too and see how he's feeling. But beyond that, I said I would not talk about every player on the roster, and I don't think I did, but definitely try to hit as many names as possible, and give a little bit of my thoughts on some of these different positions as well. That is how I'm kind of looking at this roster and some of these groups heading into spring practice. With that being said, I think we're going to be back on a weekly schedule with the podcast. We're looking to try and get a couple players, a couple coaches in here, so it isn't just me kind of rambling the entire time about a bunch of different players. And then obviously I think it's a tough part of the year right now in terms of, basketball is so busy. But Jeff and I are going to be fellow journal staff writer Jeff Grammer and I. We're going to be trying to figure out a way to get the live shows back at a regular pace to keep you guys updated on football and basketball and all that too. But yeah, this is always a really exciting time of year. It feels like every single year I do it, the more I really enjoy spring practice. And right now I'm kind of chomping at the bit to get out there and get some more information, get some more content out for you guys, and really start getting a feel for what this team's going to look like come August. But with that being said, as always, appreciate you guys listening, appreciate you guys watching. If you want to keep supporting us and supporting the pod, highly encourage you to subscribe on YouTube. Check out our some of our work on the other platforms in terms of Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And I encourage you guys to do that. Subscribe to the paper as well, and check out our other podcasts. It's an entirely different lane than what I do, but I've personally enjoyed listening to Rounding Up the Roundhouse. The work that Dan Boyd and Megan Gleason have been doing has been really good. And be sure to check out James Yotis' Prep Central. This is a busy time of year for prep sports too. Basketball playoffs just getting started, and James does such a great job with his written content, his podcast. It's really enjoyable for me, a guy that has only lived here a couple of years, to hear from a guy that just knows literally everything about the subject matter. So that being said, appreciate you guys listening as always, and looking forward to seeing you guys out at spring practice.